Hi guys, we're the Tennis Geeks. This is Purav Raja, there's Somdev Devarman. Today we're going to be talking about the racket evolution. How have rackets changed over the last 50 to 70 years? To break it down, me and Som, let's go.
Yeah, and in this video, let's discuss the details of something like a wooden racket, how long it's been around, the frame, the head size, how it evolved to the aluminum, to the graphite, what did those changes in the materials really make, and how that changed the game, how the swings changed and how that changed the game. So that's what we're going to talk about with racket technology.
Let's start, Som. Let's go straight to the wooden racket. Now, this is a Martina Navratilova racket. And this is a racket that has a very small frame on it. It's got a very small head frame. Let's remind our viewers that this was made by ash or maple wood.
And one piece of wood.
One piece of wood, ash or maple wood. This racket is heavy. I would say it's about 350 to 400 grams, which is similar. But what made it so tough to play with? So,
Well, the sweet spot. The sweet spot of all of these rackets determined exactly what shots that players could play with. So if you look at all the rackets over here, you look at Tracy Austin, Bjorn Borg, Jimmy Connors, and you have to give a shout out to Purav Raja because this proves that he is a true tennis geek because this is his personal collection. There's a Jack Kramer over there. There's another Jimmy Connors over there. But if you look at the playing styles of all of these ex-great players, you'll notice that the swing path is very linear. It's not circular with what we see today. And the reason that is linear is because the sweet spot is about that big. And if you try a Western forehand with that or anything other than a continental is what they played with, you're really not going to be able to middle.
And this was a racket used for, when we grew up, so the best part of 100 years, everybody pretty much used the wooden racket. And this was an example of it. Several Grand Slam titles, and this is really a part of history. And, going back, this was obviously used by pretty much everyone. Now, one racket that was not used by everyone and kind of came in for a very short time and kind of a collector's item, Som, is this Arthur Ashe.
It is. And the wooden rackets were in manufacturing till 1980. They stopped manufacturing in 1980. Just before that is when this came out. And Arthur Ashe did win multiple majors with this. But this was not around for that long because of the heaviness of the racket.
How heavy is this?
It's incredibly heavy. Something close to 600 grams, 650 grams.
And look at the head size of this. This is a little slightly bigger than the wooden racket, a little bit bigger than the wooden racket, but not too much in it. Now, let's go into a little bit of deep dive of why they used this racket. This was used by Arthur Ashe to get power. Now, what is power? Power is mass times acceleration, Som. But the problem is that you couldn't really accelerate with this racket because the mass was too heavy.
and your shoulder is going to fall off. So if, nowadays tennis players want to hit it bigger, want to hit it harder. If you swing this thing as hard as you can, you're not going to be able to do it too long. And also the sweet spot was bigger, but very, very marginally bigger.
This was an aluminum graphite mix.
It was and Jimmy Connors played with a similar racket as well. But then the evolution then went into the late 80s and you saw, I hope that didn't break. But you went into the late 80s and the famous ones were John McEnroe and Steffi Graf. And this is where you started seeing a difference in head size. It's much, much bigger compared to what we saw here. And that changed the linearness of the stroke.
And you think that's where tennis really changed. And that's when people could start using, we saw different shots now. Now we're seeing a little more westernness in grips. We're seeing the slice having a little more impact. We know that, Steffi Graf was a perfect example. She could actually hit the kick serve. She could actually rip the forehand with some topspin. She had way more on her backhand slice than you could.
Yeah,
imagine Martina. She could not pass with this racket.
How do you hit a kick serve with this versus hitting a kick serve with this? How do you generate spin on this versus generating spin on this? Yeah. And also, don't forget, the materials, the wood dies a lot faster than the graphite. The wood gives you a lot less power than the graphite. And that's how the evolution began.
This is the first racket with carbon composite. This is the first racket made.
The Max 200G. And I promise you I played with this at some point. I really did. But then after that, you started seeing players like Agassi come in.
Yeah.
And that was early 90s. And for the first time, you started seeing, for me, you start seeing players using their whole bodies and the athleticism of the legs and a massive swing, a powerful swing on both sides. And that's Andre Agassi for you.
Yeah, you can't generate immense amounts of topspin, but you can this was a revolution. Quirton.
It was.
This was the racket that came about and people were just loving it. And mind you, this is a painted 2001 model. It's a PT57A head racket. So this is not out of a factory, and the professional players just paint their rackets to, to whatever the new colors are. But this is the original PT57A. And I'm sure you and every company has their own kind of, professional rackets. And this was one of them that stood the test of time.
It did. And again, talking about the linear backswing and the linear follow through in a Max 200G in somebody like a McEnroe or a Steffi Graf, to a circular and a full swing on both sides, like an Agassi, like a Correa, like a Michael
You
Chang.
could finally hit spin with this ball.
A lot of spin.
A lot of spin. I mean, not compared, and we will get to that, not compared to maybe today, where the game has changed so much.
And then, but in the mid-90s, you started seeing isometric shapes. And Martina Hingis is someone who's always played with Yonex. Leighton Hewitt's played with Yonex. David Nalbandian. And again, easy to compare the sweet spots. Look at that. Over here, it's maybe right there. Over here, the sweet spot is there.
Yeah.
So you can literally hit the ball anywhere as hard as you can, and you get more consistent results.
And they weigh similar. And with a lot more power on them. Look at the beam. Look at the beam difference, Som. We got to talk about that. I mean, look how thin this beam is, and look how thick your beam is here. This is really a big difference between the two beams of, this is half the beam. It's pretty much half the beam.
Yeah, and so that once the isometric racket shape started coming on, then was the biggest game changer. This one, similar to the Babolat. I played with Babolat my whole life.
This is the same. Babolat, Wilson, they all do it now. This is that. I think that made the difference, right? That little
thing did. But the first people that we saw using these rackets that made it famous, for me, Carlos Moya, winning the French. Everybody saw that racket and said, how is that happening? Andy Roddick after that. And then Rafa with the Aero Pro.
I mean, Rafa particularly with this, and Alcaraz now. Rafa and Alcaraz, they just dominated the the pure Aero frame, And that was the difference. Like the Pure Drive was very famous, but the Aero Pro was the one that kind of, Pure Drive kind of took over at the start of Babolat, and then now it was the Aero Pro that's kind of just dominating the top guys now, Rafa and Alcaraz especially. And what's the difference, so?
Well, can you imagine having a Rafael Nadal type swing with this racket? And then this racket. And then you'll start understanding that your hand's going to fall off if you play with this. You can't put a whole lot of legs into it. You better come into the net because you want to hit volleys. You don't want to hit ground strokes. And over here, it's just completely different because it allows you to take a full swing at the ball from any position on the court. And, you can't hit a kick serve with this, and you can hit pretty much any serve with it.
Yeah, I mean, hold that racket up, and that's the evolution, guys.
If you're really looking at this racket, this is the new age racket. This is the old school racket. Which of the modern players, which of the top three, which of the big three, let's say, would be the best with this racket?
I'll answer this one for you, and the answer is quite simple. I think everyone agrees. It's got to be Roger Federer with this racket. I mean, this racket, nobody else could be able to play with this. Just the spin generated, and I can't even imagine Rafa's forehand there. But, I'm going to throw a googly back at you and say, who do you think of the olden players would be the best with this racket?
Jimmy Connors, Rod Laver. I can only, because Rod Laver was creating a little bit of topspin with this, so I can only imagine what he was creating. Rod Laver was the first guy that could hit every ball as hard as he can, full swing with that linear swing, not the circular swing, and still get the ball in. Because he could do it with that. I can only imagine what Rod Laver would do with that racket.
That's the racket evolution, guys. You've heard our thoughts. Can't wait to hear yours. Like, share, subscribe. Tell us your comments below. This is our racket evolution. We are the Tennis Geeks. Thanks for watching.